So welcome to this Lightest Legal Soundbite. My name's Sue Dawes, I'm from Open Identity Exchange, and I'm welcoming here today Graux from Time.lex. We're both consortium partners on the Lightest project, and we thought we would do an introduction to where we are on the legal side of our project so that you could get a basic understanding of the work that we've done so far at the end of this first year. So, right, Hans, let's get started then. So, perhaps you can tell me a little bit about the legal premise behind Lightest, just to set the scene.
Well, so Lightest really aims to support any kind of scenario where somebody needs to take a decision about whether a specific transaction can be trusted. So that can relate to whether you know the person involved, whether they're allowed to represent an organization, what kind of value a contract is supposed to have, and so forth. In a lot of different contexts, those kinds of decisions need to be made. And right now that has to be done very much on a case-by-case, ad hoc basis. People have to invent their own technologies, their own solutions for that. What we want to do with Lightest is to use the DNS infrastructure as a way of supporting the decision making. So DNS is used globally already, and it can be used to reference specific trust schemes, trust policies, basically the rules that you use for decision making. Once we've done that within Lightest, we can create applications, software that integrates automatically existing legal rules, legal frameworks, like for instance the adress regulation, which in Europe governs the electronic identification and signature processes, but also more basic stuff like how business registers work, how mandates need to be closed, how contracts can be signed, and so forth. Any kinds of those processes where you have legal rules, we want to provide the technical infrastructure building on the DNS to make that decision-making process easier and more reliable in an international context.
What are the key features of Lightest that would help to break the ground in cross-border trust agreements?
The main position that we've always taken is that Lightest, from our perspective, it's a toolbox. So it's not a service that's provided by a third party. It's a series of software packages, a series of technical tools that you can use and deploy in your own context, in your own situation, to match your own preferences and your own specific needs. So that's true from the technical perspective. There's software that we will develop that you can download and use locally, but it's also true from the legal perspective. This is because the legislation is what it is. Within the context, we cannot change that. We need to work within the legal boundaries. But what we can do is explain to people how they can use these specific tools. So that manifests itself in the form of specific guidelines where we explain to people what they need to do if they want to use Lightest as a legal tool set for their own context, but also in a series of model terms and conditions, model contracts that people can implement for their own applications. And in the spirit of eating our own dog food, it's not just a pure research project where we just provide guidance. We also run actual pilots, actual real-life use cases, where we will also, from a legal perspective, be writing the terms and conditions and the contracts to show to people that this works and that you can actually use the DNS to support trust decision making.
So what compliance features do you think need to be built into the Lightest technology to ensure that legal requirements are met?
This is actually a very complicated question, and we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And in the end, what we did is we tried to come up with what we call sort of a legal assessment framework. This is basically a checklist, if you will, that you can apply to any kind of Lightest use case. So that includes topics like the data quality, how often is it updated, service quality, I'm sure that my service provider is available, legal validity, is this authoritative, is this correct information, or do I get the assurances behind that? Basically all of those questions. And it also addresses more fundamental rights issues like privacy and data protection, which are critically important in Europe right now, but also issues like non-discrimination. How do I make sure that by building this application, I'm not accidentally discriminating against certain user groups? So we built that assessment framework that allows you to get used that sort of as a checklist in any kind of Lightest use case, and we'll be applying that on our own pilot projects as well to show how it can be done. So it's both an exploration of this technology, but also a demonstration.
And finally, what 4 areas do you think the cross-border legal compliance actually addresses?
So we've actually split up the legal work into 4 specific subtopics that actually address the main components of the Lightest project. First of those is a publication of trust scheme information. This is finding out what are the rules. How can I find out whether an identity or a signature or a declaration, whether that's trustworthy? So we provide the tools for modeling that and for finding out how reliable that process is. The second is trust translation, which is finding out what is equivalent, what is acceptably equivalent to my own internal rules. To give a certain example, I might trust signatures or identities from my own country, but what happens if I want to accept those from another country? Translation allows you to look at which kind of mechanisms, systems are acceptable from your own context, and to bridge that to make a link with other equivalent ones, so that when one of the foreign ones, one of the ones that you're less familiar with come in, you can automatically determine equivalence. Third is delegation, which is a very interesting issue. That's finding out who is allowed to represent somebody else. So that can be a person who is authorized to represent a company, but also, for instance, a parent being permitted to represent their child in a given transaction. That's an important building block. And then finally, the part where everything comes together is trust and policy decision making. So this, what we basically want to do is, that's where the whole magic formula comes together, where we want to allow people to define their own trust policies, their own rules that they will determine whether the answer to a question is yes or no. That'll be highly customizable. And where we want to make sure that the services you use for that also clarify to what extent you can trust on that decision. So those are sort of the four main topics that we are dealing with and the legal context that we are examining.
Okay, super. That was really helpful. Hopefully that's a good start for people to get to grips with this legal side. And we'll come back to you in hopefully about 6 months' time at our next General Assembly and get the next update from you.
Look forward to giving you an update.
Thanks, Hans.
Thank you.